My name is Amy. This is the UX Design for Dastardly Villains panel, just an overview of user experience design and how you may apply it to general villainy. We'll look at some different examples of some industry mavericks, as you would say. And this is kind of meant as like an overview of like some general UX principles, but through this lens. Just to give you a little bit of a background of where I'm coming from. I did my undergrad and my master's in human-computer interaction. And after that, I did some UX. I worked as a UX specialist in academia, like research projects. Then I did industry. And now I'm a government contractor with the CDC. So I spend a lot of my time going through the old CDC websites. But this is just some of the like general stuff when I'm telling people, like my parents, what I do for a job. This is kind of the stuff that I tell them. So let's start off with some definitions. First of all, user experience or UX answers that fundamental question of what is it like to be a user of a system or a thing? What is it like to use this thing? In the case of a video game, we would be looking at a character experiencing or traversing a level, completing a goal, whether that's to get to the end of the level, to be the big bad at the end, to collect a certain number of things like that. Kind of breaking down UX practicing into a couple of things. UX research is kind of that beginning stage of gathering data and understanding the problem space that you're working with, because first research, you start with a question. You seek to answer that question, and based on the answers that you get from that research, that will inform your design, which goes into UX design, which is the actual planning and blueprinting and drafting and doing the thing, like creating the thing with that user in mind. So this is by no means comprehensive. I know it might be a little drinking through the fire hose, but just a couple little takeaways or just things to think about. And then I'll have a slide with like some resources if you're interested in the topic of UX in general at the end. So let's look at some notable no-gooders. So these three are exemplary in their field. Classic video game villains like Bowser, Dr. Robotnik, they're proactive planners who design challenges with their foes in mind. Like things are curated specifically for them, play to their strengths, but not too easy, where it's not gratifying. It's like with sports, it's no fun if it's not close. You want something that's engaging, exciting, but doable and fair. It's all about the experience. Victory is a part of the experience, but the how gives value to the weight and the meaning of that victory. And at the end of the day is a good story being told. So a couple, like these guys come in a couple different flavors. Bowser specializes in jump-centric platforming. Mario is his main adversary, as well as catering to Luigi, Peach, Toad, a couple other people over time. He uses a lot of employees to get his work done. Whereas Robotnik down here, he's more catered towards speed. He's building Hot Wheels tracks for a reason. It's a lot of materials cost, but it's worth it because Sonic is his foe. And also can lower costs by not hiring employees, but building robots instead, so that goes toward the track cost. And then GLaDOS focuses on physics-centric puzzles. She's really, really great at research. She'll tell you so. So I'll use examples from these guys as we're going through today to just illustrate some of the things that I'm talking about. So getting started, let's say that you want to, you've picked a foe, you want to get started. A good place to start is with research. Get to know them, know your enemy. If you've worked with them before, promise you'll be back. Iteration is key, always improving. Start with research to understand who you're working with and what are their strengths and weaknesses. What do they want out of this? What do you want out of this relationship? Iterative design is kind of the bread and butter of this whole cycle of development, where you start with research, define the problem. From what you gather from that informs the design that you make. then you build prototypes of that thing, or you build the thing, and then you test it again and do research to gauge, did it work, did it not, how can we make it better for the next time? And you just rinse and repeat this cycle. This is like the heart of the whole process. So if you're starting with research at the start, there's a lot of different research tools you can use. Interviews, those can be predefined questions, or kind of free interview where you kind of see where the conversation is going. Focus groups, which is like an interview but with more people, different surveys. Contextual inquiry is when you go to, like, let's say somebody's working at a job site and you observe them there and they tell you about all the day-to-day of their work. Like, if you're gonna be running alongside Mario and he's gonna tell you, besides Wahoo, like, this is how I go about the jumping and going through the level, and like telling you what he does with different elements. With this, there's different types of data. Quantitative is your numbers. That's kind of what's considered your hard data. That's numbers and stats. That's one way to measure things. A lot of scores are measured in that way. But qualitative data is more subjective. That's if somebody's making offside comments, if somebody's telling you directly about something, if you are gauging their emotional reactions. Those things are also important. Usually good user experience design encompasses, like, measures both of these things to make sure that you're getting an all-around good experience. Like Lado says, use a variety of tools in your research. Additional tools are helpful too. If you get into the weeds of UX a bit more, there's things called affinity diagrams, which are like basically big maps with post-it notes that's like categorizing information. Personas are another instance. I'll show you that in a minute. Competitive analysis is looking at how other people have tackled the problem and what you can take away from that, what you can learn, like what your do's and don'ts are. But yeah, basically you have a toolbox here. You have to, all of them are good for different things. Using a variety of tools will ensure that you have a well-built house. Don't just use a hammer, use all the other stuff in the toolkit as well. So let's look at one of those more specialized tools, personas. Not this persona right here, but a persona is an exercise that describes a typical or target user. It's kind of like an ad in the paper for hot signals in your area. Promote empathy and understanding. It's getting an idea of like a profile of who this is that you're designing for, and provides a mental model to use when you're making decisions. So like, how would this person think about this thing if I posed it to them? So I've got a couple personas here. This one is Sonic the Hedgehog. I included a quote here. Sometimes you can include quotes to get an idea of like who they are. But usually it's broken down, like this is a very basic template, but there are other templates you can use, but usually start with like a biography of like, this is who this person is, a tidbit about them. Some core needs, like these are the main things that they need from whatever you're designing for. And then behaviors, which is like things they do or don't do, so you can kind of predict like, well, they're gonna be doing this, so I should consider that when I'm making this thing. So with Sonic, I think he's pretty self-explanatory, but some of his core needs are, he's gotta go fast. So whatever you're designing, it has to facilitate reaching and maintaining high speeds. And therefore, it can't be too short or else the experience is gonna be over. He's moving through it faster than maybe somebody else. Yes, question?
So, do you define the core needs based on conflict of how they're going together with your system, or do you kind of just put them on the native and this is what this person needs, therefore if I bring this probably my system should do?
Oh, that's a good question. So the question was, are the core needs kind of in the context of like what you're designing, or are they just general core needs? I should have defined that more. These are core needs as it pertains to the design space or whatever you're designing for. So with Sonic, when he is going through a level, when he is facing a foe, these are like the wish list items that he has. He wants to go fast. He wants to do some cool jumping and stuff like that. He really likes time-based challenges. Anything that's really gonna push that as a criteria for success. And some good sarcastic banter. He kind of has a little bit of an attitude, so like out of his experience, he wants to have a little bit of a relationship with a rival. As far as behaviors, if he's going to be using the thing you designed, these are some trends that he does. He really tries to start off building some good speed. So like maybe when you're designing a level, start it with like a boost pad at the beginning or some means of building up and maintaining speed where you're not just starting, like Sonic Adventure 2, a lot of times you're dropped immediately into the level and onto a dash pad so you could just get from the get-go. So that's like one way you could tackle that. And maintaining speeds, be mindful of obstacles in your design, make sure that like things are, lending to that maintaining, keeping speed. He won't go for items if they're too far away, and if they cause him to lose speed. He likes to smash robots on sight, so keep that in mind where you're placing things. That can help you, that can hurt you. Also, he can't swim, so no swimming levels. That's just gonna be a deal breaker for him. Conversely, the Mario brothers, it's interesting to see these side by side because they have some similarities, but also a couple of slight differences, and you have to account for these when you're designing challenges for them. Both of them are good at jumping and running, but they both have slightly different physical capabilities in that way. Mario has a pretty decent run speed. He can jump fairly well. Luigi is a little more slippery. He has a flutter jump as well, so if you're trying to judge like jump distance or jump height, you want something that's going to kind of hit the Goldilocks zone for both of these guys, or you have separate courses for each of them based on that. Also some behavioral things like Luigi might need a little bit more like, nudging, whether that's like pushing from behind for him to run away from something or like running towards safety, whereas Mario doesn't really need that motivation. So that's like an emotional aspect of this. So that's like an example of personas you can use to just like, it's like a flashcard, just getting a snapshot and an idea of like who you're working with, and you can go back and reference this later when you are trying to make decisions about what you're doing. Before I go into design, are there any more questions? Great, I'll take your silence as a resounding, we're okay. So this is just a table of some base principles. This is by no means like the list. This is compiled from a couple different sources, but just some nice rule of thumb things to go by. And we'll go through each of these and examples of them. So first off, usability. This is kind of the general idea of, is it usable? Can you use this thing to complete a task, to fulfill a means, things like that. In the sense of a game, if you're the villain designing for things, does the person going through it, does your rival have a good experience? Are they gonna wanna come back for the sequel? Are they gonna wanna come back and do New Game Plus? Are they prepared over the course of the game to face you in the end? So like at the beginning, they may not have much of a knowledge of like what kinds of things you're going to be putting in levels, what the expectations for performance are. Your job as the villain is to kind of elevate them to their potential and kind of teach them how to do complex tasks so by the time they get to you, you can have a really riveting experience. Like, it's not just going to be level 1 stuff at that point. And where your design's useful in telling a good story. At the end of the day, can you tell a story like this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened, instead of just, he came over and we fought and it was over. So an example of that here in Super Mario 64 coming in, like, I really like the staging for like, oh, you thought you were gonna come over for a tea party? Well, too bad. Like using the castle as like the starting stage and setting like the expectation is for you to climb the castle, to open the doors, to go through and pick up skills like jumping, long jumping, running, twirling, all kinds of stuff using different items. You can see the difference in escalation here from the first a confrontation with Bowser in the Dark World, that's a fairly simple obstacle course compared to what you work up to towards the end. So it's really satisfying to get at the end of this gauntlet and then have a big fight at the end. It wouldn't be as satisfying if you had a repeat of that Dark World at the very end. It just doesn't feel very exciting. Next is learnability. How easy is it for your foe to learn new concepts? A lot of this is like tutorial design. This is more like show, don't tell. Like, don't have exposition like Oma Chow telling you how to do all the controls and everything. People are going to tune that out. You should probably leave clues in the environment for people to, kind of play around in a safe space versus just giving them a handbook and being like, go ham on this. So like a good example is these flip switches down here. At the beginning of the level, there's a Goomba that's stationed there to encourage Mario to jump. When he jumps, he sees, oh, that manipulates these flips. Therefore, jumping manipulates the flips. I can go forward later in the level and see like, oh, there's more challenges with flips with enemies dispersed in them, or there's not a floor underneath. Like you escalate, that kind of thing. But you didn't use any words to tell him how to do this. Easy to learn, hard to master. Bite-sized lessons are good. If you just inundate people with instructions, they're not going to pay attention. It's building up those little skills. Like in skateboarding, it's like you learn a kickflip, you learn an ollie, you learn these little pieces of things, and then you can chain them together to get really good scores, and VHS tapes. Room to explore and experiment, like here, Mario's not in danger of falling off here, but later he will be. So by the time he gets to that point, it's a worthy challenge of like, I know what tools I'm working with, so this is a fair challenge. Like if I fall through the floor, it's my fault. I need to learn how to do this. And building on prior knowledge, mental models, expectations, these are things that like have parallels elsewhere, like buttons, rails, boxes, anything like that. Anything from prior games, you can build on that. They have already learned, like Mario already knows what certain blocks do, what certain power-ups do. Sonic knows what different track elements do. You can build off of that to build even more complexity as you're going forward. Yeah, and don't insult their intelligence. Like, don't just sit them there and tell them like what they have to do. Nobody likes that. So that kind of gets to this point about one of the key takeaways I think here would be affordances. This is basically, if you have a designed element, what does it suggest to you that you could do with it? How does it suggest you interact with it? So yeah, the qualities and properties of an object that defines its possible uses. Like buttons are usually colorful, big, a basic shape. They kind of move up and down. They're really juicy, like you want to touch them. These things suggest that a button can be pressed. Like when you go up to a button, it's fairly clear what you should do. So affordances like platforms and blocks, they afford standing on them, especially if the size is like about the size for you. Whether that's, Sonic or Mario or anybody else. Slide chutes and rails, those play off of real world conventions. Slides, it's pretty clear what you do with the slide. Buttons, levers, and handles. All these other different elements that you can build on. I have an example here of a spring from the Sonic series, but there are 3 different kinds of springs and they afford different things. So the base one is just kind of a button, you jump on it. The second one here has got a little bit of a permutation. Propellers, on the bottom suggest that like something is going to happen when you hit this button, but something on the bottom is going to happen. And a lot of times propellers are used like to move air, so you can deduce from that this propeller button will send me into the air, or like send me vertically. With the spike one, this is telling you not to touch it on the bottom. Do not jump into this. It is going to hurt real bad. So you can use different like suggestions to kind of guide people into using different things. So next we'll look at a couple of examples. So can anybody point out to me like different items, like how they would suggest being interacted with?
The orange button maybe when you're jumping on
Yeah, so like these big glowing buttons here. Yeah, they're a proper size where like you could jump on them, like they afford holding you up, but you don't have to be super precise on them, but they're really glowing and pulsing, which kind of draws you in, and it's like, ooh, this is like something interactive. It's something that stands out. Great. Another item would be like the spiked floors change in their affordance of you landing on them. When the spikes are up, that affordance of landing on it safely is gone. So over time, you can like play with, if platforms appear or disappear. There's some here that fall away. Those are different like permutations of a platform that give different suggestions on how you can and cannot use it. The same thing with like the rotating spike pillars. Those are one of Bowser's favorites. Having them rotating kind of changes like your window of when you can and cannot jump through them. So great, thank you for that. Here we have an example of Eggman's pyramid layer from Sonic Adventure 2. I'll just point out a couple of these. The bar here that Sonic is just jumping from, that's it's bright red. It stands out from the environment. That suggests that it's something you can interact with. It's also about the size of Sonic's grip hands. I mean, Sonic kind of has large hands, but that's sufficient for him to like grab it and rotate around it where it's not gonna like lose his grip or it's not gonna be too tight. So that's especially designed for him. That hourglass button, that's another big juicy button there that you can jump on. It's about within jumping height pretty easily. But that in turn changes the affordance of the door, which opens and slowly closes. So the affordance of passing through the door changes as time progresses until you can like squeeze in there. But also prior, some other platforms are available via button press that are about the size that you can land on them fairly safely with some wiggle room, but they also get smaller and retract into the wall, so you are gradually losing that affordance of landing on it. And then anything in aperture science is full of affordances. All kinds of buttons. You have hand press buttons that are small and are about your waist height of a standard human or a humanoid robot. You've got bigger buttons here, which you could stand on with your full body, but also suggest like, well, there's a squarish button and a squarish shape that's, very friendly looking, could probably fit on that little bit. Let's see. The buttons, goo. There's all different kinds of goo here. It's brightly colored. That suggests it does something because it stands out from that stark environment, and it's spreadable. Like the viscous nature of goo allows you to spread it places, and therefore the expectation is like paint the walls, put it places because it'll help you do something. Platforms, as usual, are for jumping. They can change in, if they're moving or not. We've got some that are like elevators. We've got some that like hide and show and retract. You're kind of told early in the game you can place portals on white surfaces. So any white surfaces are kind of suggesting to you, you can place a portal here, you probably should. So that's full of different affordances. Water affords drowning also. So any questions about affordances real quick before we keep going? Thank you all for bearing with me. I know it's early this morning. So keeping going on, effectiveness. How effective is the design in filling its purpose? Did you provide a reasonable challenge? Was it a compelling experience? How well did you communicate this is your opportunity for your brand? Are you Bowser's Kingdom? Are you the Eggman Empire? Are you Aperture Laboratories? Really convey that. Make that part of the experience. Yeah, will they be back for more? And when the credits rolled, did you tell an effective story? So efficiency is a very fun thing in video games because this is where a lot of these practitioners run into trouble with unexpected behaviors. Once users have learned the design, how quickly can they perform tasks? And they will start pushing the envelope on how you can perform these tasks. You can design something that's like so well thought out, but if you're not accounting for contingencies, like users are always gonna go in and break it. Which is kind of fun to watch, can be infuriating, especially like if they're missing all of the cool stuff that you designed. So keeping that in mind, like what is the intended path or experience that you want people like to kind of guide them through so they don't kind of do this bonkers stuff and then they get upset because it's like, well, that was it, or something's not working as expected. Yeah, so for efficiency, account those things, but also account for like how fast do they make it through the level. I assure you that Mario would take a much longer time to get through a Sonic design level. Sonic would blaze through a Mario-based level and may not be able to, he may fall into some of those jump traps. So gauging, kind of like, movies or anything else, what feels like a good length? You can measure this in like quantitative time, but qualitatively you can see like, did this feel slow? Did this feel too fast? You can kind of gauge those things and ask like, did I go through this too quickly? Did it feel just right? Yeah, is the time and effort to complete tasks reasonable? Checkpoints may come into play with this. If you're asking somebody to do a lot of tasks over time, kind of giving a little bit of forgiveness for that load. But yeah, speedrunning drastically changes this experience. Mario is especially notorious for this, but it is fascinating. Make things efficient, but like account for ways that they can break it and bypass things. So productivity. This goes more into scoring. Can users accomplish what needs to be done with the tools given? If you've given them all of the level elements and things like that, did they finish all or any challenges? You can even see like, they were focused on completing a good time, but they didn't pick up as many items. You could tweak things to say like, well, I want you to be like, to kind of suggest like, pick up more items if that's what I think would be a better experience, like based on kind of what you're telling me. Yeah, did they finish challenges? Mechanics should become second nature. So you can, like, if you're in the zone, you're not really thinking about like riding the bicycle or jumping or like doing basic actions. You're thinking about how to chain those things together. You want to reach that state of like in the zone or flow, like they talk about in sports, where it's like not too easy, not too hard, it becomes muscle memory, and the challenge is chaining those things versus like the individual things. Yeah, you can measure this quantitatively with scoring metrics, like number of disasters averted, like how many times did you clip your friend in the test chamber, or qualitatively by observation, like are they goofing off in front of the cameras? Are they not really getting the stuff done that they need to? Are they too busy horsing around? And you can share feedback with them to let them know how they're doing. Like here, you're displaying in the test chamber, it's like, here's how you did. So maybe the next time you go through it, you have that in mind where it's like, oh, I can improve. Like the user can say to themselves, I can improve, or I can do a bit better, or like, I need to kind of step it up if I want to make it through more of this. So I like the scoring system for Sonic Adventure 2 kind of in this way because it's a compilation of things. You're looking at a time score, a ring score, time bonus, so like looking at collectibles as well as time. But then you also get like this qualitative feedback, which is like, that was cool, or I didn't do so hot. When you're doing little tricks through the levels, you even get these little flavor texts of like qualitative, like, I don't know how many, there's number of points associated with them, but like, if you're just going through the level, like, oh, that was extreme. Like, that's encouraging. Awesome. Keep that up. Keep doing it. Nice. All those different things. Ease of use. So in traditional UX, you would want to make something as easy to use as possible. With villainy and designing game levels, you want to make those core elements easy to use, but you don't want to make the levels themselves too easy. Otherwise, there's nothing really there. There's not a challenge. So be tough, but fair. Make it so that, the individual elements like buttons, jump pads, platforms, they work as expected. But if somebody messes up, it is their fault, not the system's fault. You want to, minimize how much error is there. But if you're a villain, you want them to fail on their own accord, not because of what you designed. So finding that Goldilocks zone where it's not too easy and not too hard. Like, you don't want them to just have a snooze fest. You can also compare this to productivity. Like, are they having a good time? Like, are they bored? Are they getting frustrated? Things like that. You can also compare this to effectiveness. Like, what is and is not being done? Things like that. I like in Paper Mario Origami King, the villain here just directly asks you for feedback on how easy or difficult is it? Well, the next room I'll adjust accordingly. I hear your feedback. So, oh yes.
Did they actually change it?
I don't think so. I think it's just flavor text, but I guess diegetically, Mario could guess that he made it a little harder. But you as the player probably know that it's pre-designed. So emotional impact, this is more like that soft data, qualitative, but you can't measure this through things like surveys. Are they happy, satisfied, frustrated, disappointed? Traditional UX is going to want people to be happy, satisfied, feel pretty good about things. As a villain, you may want to elicit some other emotions like a healthy dose of fear, a little bit of anger or frustration, but not too much. It's everything in moderation, and you'll get an understanding working with your users of where those thresholds are. The most mundane plant foilers are boredom and excessive frustration. If they are not engaging with what you've designed, you have lost the game. Yes?
Just out of curiosity, partially off topic, have you seen UI addition of biofeedback for actually measuring things like this, like pulse, EEG, electrical, things like that?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part of that, but seeing UX measures of
Using biofeedback.
Using biofeedback. I've seen different equipment for picking up biofeedback, and that is actually a tool you can use in research. I think one time I did a study where it was measuring skin conductivity, measuring different physical arousal by being excited or frustrated. So that is something you can do. I'm willing to bet it's been done with games, especially high intensity games. But yeah, that is an option. That's a whole nother thing of getting approval for that kind of testing, and that's the collecting biometric data. But that is something you can do, skin conductivity, heart rate, eye saccading, where you're looking. Those are all biofeedback measures you can do to measure emotion, if they are not telling you or if you're not picking up on it through observation. So great question. Make it worth their time and effort. You don't want it to be too long or short of a game, but you want them to remember it and walk away with it where it's that was a pretty good, satisfying, thing. And a rivalry is a relationship. How do you want to feel? How do they want to feel? What do you want this relationship to be? Communicate those things. Communication is important. You can see that Mario and Bowser, there's a determined, obviously Bowser has done something that Mario isn't very fond of, but enough to kind of spur him into action and inspire him to do things. But now and then punishing anybody who's not really stepping it up enough, where it's I know you can do this. So here in Super Mario 3D World, everybody's kind of just upset, but they'll come back again if it hasn't happened too many times. And then social acceptability. This one's a bit trickier in video games and villainy because, you know, there's a certain threshold of acceptability in villainy. There's certain things that maybe you do or you don't do, but it's mostly pertaining to character, like what is acceptable. Like, what do people expect is within the range of like what Bowser would do or Robotnik. Like, out of context, it might seem like Meowser is a little bit of a weird flex, but it makes sense within the context of this game and the things that we've been building up to it. So it's like, yeah, Meowser makes sense, and it's really fun to fight him at the end. Whereas Robotnik, Sonic Adventure 2, he gets a little bit darker. Like, I think in the past 10 years, he has not held a gun up to somebody's head. That was a little toward the edge of acceptability there. And then GLaDOS being a potato is funny, but it does make sense in the context. Like, things that may not make sense out of context, but within the game that it's in makes sense, but are also kind of expected of that villainy. So yeah, play off expectations and existing mental models. How is your brand defined? If people don't really get it or immediately repulsed, then that, you know, they're not going to engage. They're kind of just going to write it off. You know, be creative, but don't do things that are too far out of character or require litigation. I cannot provide any any law recommendations here. So once you've done the design bit, you've built it, now it's time to test it and keep gathering feedback. So you can use those same research tools, you know, surveys, interviews, observation, measuring scores, watching them go through it, asking them directly, to, you know, adjust things, get actual data to justify and inform the next cycle of like, well, these are the improvements I'm going to make, or the next game, maybe I'll do this, or I want to carry over these things, but not these things, or things like that. You can ask how it was at the end of the level or when you see them in person at the end, like how is that banter at the end? This is an example from Sonic Colors where, you know, Robotnik is giving some carnival-themed puns, but Sonic's not really having it. He's kind of like, just tell us you're going to destroy us already. Like, that would be a million times better. Make the required changes, make the requested changes, and then it's like, okay, this feels right again. And rinse and repeat until your plans are complete. If you succeed in this, you should have a lifelong rivalry with some really compelling characters. You can really help them reach their potential. You can see them do some cool things, and you'll have some really great showdowns at the end. So for further reading, if you're interested in some of the little UX principles that I've gone over here, Nielsen Norman Group is like one of the flagship best practices groups when it comes to anything UX. They have a lot of free online learning materials. I've included a design principles directory, which is just like a tidbit of like different topics. A UX glossary, the similar thing. Talking about like psychological biases in research and design, design principles, things like that. UX Collective is a Medium channel that does a lot of really interesting in-depth articles. And then some YouTube channels that pertain to UX and gaming, particularly Game Maker's Toolkit. I can't recommend enough. We watch it all the time. And then Snowman Gaming also has some really good points about like good design and bad design. May not call it UX design, but like game design and how it pertains to experience. So with that, I want to say thank you so much for coming this morning. I know it was really early. If you have questions, I can stick around. But otherwise, thank you so much for coming this morning. I hope you have a safe travel back to wherever you came from after MAGFest. And yeah, have a good morning, everybody.